Hi everyone, it's Vicky. We're at Safe Path Home today. Melissa Agard is my guest. Melissa is a proud mom of 4 sons, East High and UW-Madison graduate, and lifelong Madison resident. Senator Melissa Agard is dedicated to moving Wisconsin forward. Senator Agard was first elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly in November of 2012 and the Wisconsin State Senate in November 2020. She represents the 16th Senate District, encompassing much of the north, east, and south sides of Dane County. During her time in the legislature, she has championed policies that support and strengthen our communities, ensure government works for the ordinary people of Wisconsin, and build an economy that works for all of us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here today. So I thought we'd start off by talking about the AB 465 bill that was trotting through last year, and our lovely governor vetoed it. But can you talk about that a little bit and what your thoughts are behind where it sits right now?
Yeah, so, a lot of people's minds will automatically go to telling folks a bill number, but big secret about the legislature, there's like more than 1,000 bills that are introduced on a legislative session. So I always like to be able to explain what AB 465 is, because if it's introduced again in another session, it will have a completely different number. And I think it's important for people to know the content behind them. But this is a terrible bill. And I'm really grateful for Governor Evers every single day here in Wisconsin, but when things like this come forward and our legislative colleagues continue pushing it through the process because they want to have the conversation, right? You literally hear that on the floor, not in committee, but on the floor when people are voting on a bill. Oh, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I'm going to vote yes, and my stomach just gets in knots, and so hard. But ultimately, this bill is a direct attack on trans folks. It is a bill that was put forward by Republicans in the legislature, both in the Senate and the Assembly. So we know sometimes they get along and sometimes they don't. This is one that they actually unified behind, which is even scarier. But it was fast-tracked. And this piece of legislation would demonize trans individuals in Wisconsin in order, for my opinion, for the Republican Party to score cheap political points. And scoring political points on the direct attack on someone's identity, I don't fathom that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So ultimately, every major medical organization was against this piece of legislation. The American Medical Association, the list is long, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, American Psychological Association. We know that gender affirming care, so this bill would have prevented doctors and parents from being able to provide gender-affirming care to their kiddos. And we know that this care is life-saving. And not only is it life-saving, but it is safe, it is medically necessary, and not providing it will cause us to lose kiddos. And frankly, when Wisconsin is already having a challenge of holding on to families and recruiting good, smart people to come into Wisconsin to provide innovation and, that new exciting blood that we all look forward to. This type of legislation is going to prevent people from moving here. Even though we have Governor Evers signing this bill, it's going to prevent people from moving here. And, words matter. We just saw this week the loss of life of a young person in a Midwestern, more Western than we are, state. I believe because we're normalizing this type of attack.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, really sad when we're going to say Max Benedict's name. And we're going to keep saying it.
We're going to say next. That's right.
So I saw the governor speak at the National Coming Out Day breakfast, and the direct quote that I wrote down from him at the end of the talk he was giving was that as long as I am governor, none of these damn bills will ever cross my desk. And we're encouraged to see that that's what's happening. Wonderful.
So I've had young people and their families come into my office with tears in their eyes.
Yeah.
About, what are we gonna have to move?
Sure.
And, is school a safe place for my child? And is it okay for us to go to parks and to recreate in our community with all of this going on? And, it's such a personal decision.
Yeah,
It's
right.
really, really hard. But I just hope that we all lean in a little bit more.
Yeah. I don't have children, but I can imagine that if you're a parent and your child is navigating, transitioning, you're doing every single thing you can to keep them safe. And then when the government is seemingly lashing out, like, yeah, your instinct would be, where do I go now?
Yeah.
Can I stay here and be safe?
There was a rally that I took my kids to a handful of years ago, and it was a pride rally, and it was in response to some crap that was happening in the legislature. I can't even remember what it was. I believe it was before Governor Evers was elected. I should go back and dust off my memory a little bit before I tell this complete story. But I had brought my kiddos, and there were counter protesters at the rally, and they had big signs that were really full of hateful words and striking fear and the peace-loving people that were coming together to provide an inclusive space for folks. And my third son, Keenan, was pretty little at this point in time. And I remember he found there were balloons everywhere that people had brought, and they were like tied to different things. And he just was collecting all these balloons like a squirrel, and I didn't know what was happening. And I realized that he was getting a big enough balloon bouquet that he could stand in front of the terrible words on the sign, so that people didn't have to see it. So, there is space for everyone, no matter what their age, to be able to do whatever act, big or small, collect balloons, take space, provide support for folks to fight against this type of rhetoric. It's really, it's important that we do that.
Yeah, I agree completely. What a neat story about a young person had such a loving instinct.
All on his own. And I did.
Great.
I was in my mind, I was like, he's acting like a squirrel. What is he going to do with all these balloons?
So funny. That's so funny. Well, that's an interesting segue then. Let's talk about some housing stuff. So there are protections in different states relating to sexual orientation and gender identity in relation to housing. In the state of Wisconsin, we protect sexual orientation, same in Dane County, and then Madison adds gender equality, which is lovely. And we were talking about the growth coming into Madison and the surrounding area. Do you think that some of that is related to the protections that we offer the community?
Yeah, I ask myself these questions on a pretty regular basis, I think, as a policymaker and as someone just who cares about my neighbors and the temperature of my community. What is it that is causing Dane County to be the place of all the communities in Wisconsin, 72 counties? This is the one county where we're having growth. And there's a lot of reasons why we are losing people, especially young people in Wisconsin. And I think hopefully with more fair maps and a more balanced legislature, we're going to see that shift change, right? If you're a young person and you're thinking about starting a family, you're probably going to go to a state that has affordable childcare and family medical leave, comprehensive health care, mental health supports, right? And if you're a family that has LGBTQ kids or you are a member of the LGBTQ community, you're probably going to go to a state where you're not afraid that all your rights are going to be pulled out from underneath you. So with all of that said, Dane County does have this unprecedented growth. And I do think that it is because we are a place that welcomes folks and that overwhelmingly cares about the safety and security of people. Now, we do have challenges, certainly. For most people, Dane County is a great place to be. But there are divides within our community. And I think that we need to be thinking about those weaknesses that we have. But I would think that the fact that the city and the county have extended additional protections, especially the city of Madison, to folks, and even in our surrounding communities, when people come in and try to ban books or even say, you can't read this book in your classroom. Do you remember that a handful of years ago over in Mount Horeb? That people stand up, and that feels good when you know that there are people that are going to stand up for you.
Yeah, there's a culture of protest here that's different from other places, right? And truthfully, the inclusivity of Madison is the reason that I'm here. I've lived here just a little over a year, and when I was considering making the move, it was a factor for sure. I wanted to know that I would be safe and that my partner and I could rely on the protections if we ever needed them. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a factor. And I would think that large companies that are trying to recruit people to the area talk about that.
You would think, you know, despite what Robin Voss in the legislature says about DEI, I think that it is clear that successful businesses and higher education institutions that think about DEI, that think about how it is that we make safe spaces, welcoming spaces, and that we lift up leadership of women and queer folks and people of color, that is actually a good thing. And I think there's plenty of research out there. I actually was reading a report that was written by WMC of all organizations that said that the attacks on diversity and inclusion in Wisconsin are harmful, and that we need to stop that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about affordable housing a little bit. Can you talk about, so let's talk about affordable housing a little bit. I think there's a preconceived notion about what affordable housing means.
Oh my goodness.
So you want to talk about that?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah. So when I was elected to the Senate, you know, my campaign was during COVID, so that makes it a very interesting time to get to know a community and introduce yourself to folks in it. So after the election was over, I really prioritized getting out and talking to folks about what is that's working in their communities and what wasn't working in their communities. What can we do better? And overwhelmingly, cities, towns, villages in the district, and even bleeding over into other communities that touch the district, people would talk about the need for more affordable housing. And I would ask, well, what is affordable housing to you?
Right.
The diversity of answers to that question were pretty wild. One person said, we need more single-family housing in the $300,000 to $400,000 mark. That was affordable housing to them. Other people said we need more workforce housing, places for our teachers and our nurses, and young couples to be able to live, and whether that's a condo or an apartment or a house, you know, thinking about that price point. And then there were other people that were talking about, you know, folks that are on public assistance and how hard it is to be able to get housing, even if you have that voucher.
Yeah, right.
You can't find that house. So when you mention affordable housing, my mind goes to, and what does that mean to you?
Right.
And what does that mean to our community?
Right. So it's my understanding from things that I've been reading recently that in Dane County specifically, we do really high, while at high-level housing, let's say 600,000 and higher, we do okay at lower-end housing. You know, let's say 200 and below, we actually do okay at that, but there's this gap in between, and we can't develop the new housing units quick enough. So what are some of the obstacles that are preventing that from going the way we need it to go?
Boy, that's a complicated question, and it's probably one that I should be asking you, because this is your bailiwick, and I look forward to being able to learn from you through this conversation as well. But I think, you know, part of it is that here in Dane County, we prioritize the diversity of our communities and our environments. You know, we have a lot of agricultural land and parks and natural spaces, and we want to protect that. We don't want to become cement from one corner to the other, and that means smart zoning.
Right.
But we also know that oftentimes with smart zoning, some people may interpret that as impossible zoning, right? Depending on what you're trying to develop,
Right.
what if it's new building or what the project might look like. Additionally, especially when it comes to housing for lower income folks or mass density housing, we do have a tendency, even in Dane County, to have a little bit of that NIMBYism, right?
Yeah.
Not next to me. Yes, I agree we need it,
Yeah.
but maybe not right here.
Right.
And that causes a sense of packing with high-density housing, which increases needs within communities. And then you need to start thinking about how it is that you provide services to people who are living there. Do we have adequate transportation? Are there grocery stores? Are there parks for our kids to play in?
Right.
If you've got a pet, is there a place where you can take your pet for a walk or hang out with them? You got a little money in your pocket, where are you going to go? Is there a coffee shop or an ice cream shop that you can go to? Where are the public libraries?
Yeah, it's not just planning the housing, it's planning the community,
It's the
right?
community. And that's, to me, that's the biggest thing, is that sense of community. I think that adequate and safe housing for people isn't just about where it is that you're putting your head on the pillow, but what it is that surrounds that community.
You, yeah. I read about 2 hotel buildings on the east side that are being converted into apartments, and they ran into some challenges because apartments, according to code, each unit has to have its own utility meters, and hotels aren't built that way. And they were given approval to move forward with conversions. They're halfway to 3/4 done and being told they can't be complete because of this meter issue. And I'm wondering, it feels like converting commercial property into residential property is wise if there's vacant commercial property. But how do we overcome some of those things?
Yes, I saw that same article.
Yeah.
And when I saw that article, I went back into my office at the Capitol and I asked my staff, I said, can we get a memo, some clarification on this? Do we need to change a law? Do we need to ask the PSC to do some rulemaking authorities? And I haven't gotten that information back yet. So I am hungry for that information as well. It's a little bit tricky to me because I think, well, maybe we should have known that before we started doing all this
And
work.
that was
Why
the
didn't
point that the
anyone?
builders were making when they were being
Why didn't the
interviewed.
city bring this up?
The builder isn't headquartered here, and it's an unusual ordinance or whatever it is. It's an unusual code that doesn't exist in other places where they're doing similar conversions, so they didn't think to look for it.
And if they're gonna have a one price serves all, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're gonna pay your rent and it's gonna include your utility and all of those services, then you kind of don't need that meter. But if they were thinking they were gonna take the utility bill for that whole building and divide it by the number of residents and split that out, then that might be a problem because some people may be more prudent with their usage. But to me, it sounded like they were thinking it was just everything was gonna be
That's
all
what I thought,
inclusive in
too.
the price. So I look forward to that clarity because we do need that.
Yeah.
We need that housing. And there's that joke out there, right? Like people our age, they're gonna turn malls into
Yeah, I just read that. Turn malls into
housing for the Gen X's,
so we
right?
can have a food court and a hair salon and an Orange Julius, right?
And the arcade, right?
Yeah, perfect. I would totally move into
And there's
that.
going to be a fountain we can throw pennies in when you make a wish.
That would be awesome. Can we have a doggy daycare inside? And
That's right. So maybe we need to figure this
we need to
metering out so that we
rethink it.
can go live in the malls when we
Yeah.
get a little older.
So funny. I did see a mall conversion, I think, in Ohio several years ago. That was actually pretty cool. And traditional malls like we grew up with in the 80s, not to date myself too much, but those are dead, right? And so what are we doing with that land and that property? And reuse is important. So it's interesting to think about all those things. We're joking about it, but maybe it does make sense.
It might make sense, right? I mean, I think about just around, like the circle that I drive in. Oscar Mayer moved out so many years ago, and it's still sitting there. We still don't, I'm sure that, there are long-term plans, and who knows, maybe the train will go there. That's going to come through. How exciting that we might actually have an Amtrak connection in
you
our
want to talk
community.
about that? What's that going to do for Madison?
I think it's going to be great. I mean, frankly, I wish it was more.
Yeah.
My heart still breaks for the fact that after Walker was elected to be our governor, even before he was sworn into office, the hopes and dreams of having Amtrak come through our community went away.
Yeah.
So to me, it's very exciting that this is a possibility, and I think it's a very real possibility. And it's clear that our mayor and the city and the leaders in the business industry are thinking very thoughtfully about where it is that we're gonna site that. But yeah, let's get it done.
Yeah, right? That would be awesome to take a train from Madison to Chicago and back and forth. That'd be great. Okay, well, let's get back to the affordable housing conversation. Do you have thoughts on, like, I feel like one of the challenges is, as you said, you know, you get just a little bit outside of Madison and it's farmland, and it's not deserted farmland, it's active farmland. And
I like to eat.
same,
So let's
I
figure
like-
out, and
I
I like
like
to eat healthy, good
corn,
food. Yeah.
potatoes, like I enjoy that as well. So how do we navigate all that? It's really interesting. You drive Madison to Sun Prairie through cornfields,
Yeah.
and then there's Sun Prairie. Do we need to be building up? Do we need to? I don't know.
I think density is important. But I think that as we're thinking about increasing our housing stock and being thoughtful about density,
Yeah.
that, we also honor our cities, our towns, and our villages.
Yeah.
And knowing that there are people that are gonna want to live in a more rural part of Dane County.
Sure.
And there are gonna be other people that are gonna wanna live in a condo downtown and be having a walkable life.
Yeah.
And providing all of those alternatives and not taking any of them off of the table. I
Yeah,
think
it's-
that space between our communities is a healthy and good thing,
Uh-huh.
personally.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about a little bit about the updates that we're working on for the Constitution in Wisconsin to include marriage equality? I'm like really excited about that.
Yeah, well, I think with the new maps that were signed into law this
Yeah.
week by Governor Evers, and I know it's been an emotional roller coaster getting to this process, but how exciting now that we've crossed that finish line. Let's embrace the good
Yeah.
that is going to happen there. We're going to have a more thoughtful and pragmatic legislature on both sides of the aisle, right?
Right.
Like, people are going to have to learn how to work with each other, not just throw jabs at one another. And my Republican colleagues, the ones that come back, they're gonna have to be accountable to not only their constituents for the first time in a long time, right? Like, I have so many folks that have contacted my office about one policy or another, and they're like, this senator wrote this bill, but they won't tell me why they wrote it, and they won't talk to me about amending it. I'm like, because they don't have to, because they're
Yeah.
just so packed into their communities. So I do think that we're gonna be able to have more conversations about how it is that we protect people in the state of Wisconsin. And make sure that that protection is long-term.
Yeah.
And, I think back, when I was first elected to the legislature, was visiting a middle school classroom. And one of the kids in the classroom said to me, what would be your dream bill
Oh,
to get passed?
what a great question from a middle schooler.
They're smart. You just need to
Listen.
make time to listen to
Yeah.
them, right? And I said, marriage equality, that's my dream bill. And then one day I was in my car, literally driving to the Dells for the Democratic convention, the state convention. And all of a sudden, on my radio, it's like, marriage equality is the law of the land.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone woke up that day thinking that was gonna happen that day, but it happened that day. And I literally turned my car around. I didn't even go into the convention and
Yeah.
came back to Madison because I had been trained on how to help our county clerk out in
Oh, yeah.
issuing marriage licenses. And I showed up, and I think over my life, where I'm a mom of 4,
Yeah.
certainly the days that my children were born were pretty darn special.
Yeah.
But that weekend changed my life.
Yeah.
And I was at the city county building, issuing marriage licenses to people who never thought that they were actually gonna be able to be married.
Yeah,
And
and I bet that the
that was
age
just-
range and
the stories,
diversity
oh
of-
my gosh.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It really, just talking about it right now, it makes me a little bit tingly.
Yeah.
So thank goodness for that, but clearly we absolutely need to go farther. And the thought that we can enshrine this in our Constitution and make sure that everyone has the same protections regardless of who it is that they love.
Right.
It is so flipping important.
Yeah.
So let's get it done. And I'm pretty cautious about constitutional amendments
Sure,
and changing
that's
our
a big deal.
Constitution. I think it's a pretty big deal. This is one that
Feels
we
like
need to get done.
We're gonna end our conversation with this thing I call the Fast Five.
Okay.
Ready?
Let's do it.
Fresh curds or fried?
Well, see, nothing is fast with me. I'm sorry.
It's
If it's
okay.
before noon, I want the fresh ones. If it's afternoon, then I want the fried ones for
Got
sure.
it.
Yeah.
Craft beer or craft cocktails?
Craft cocktails.
Okay, where?
Well, it depends on where I am.
Oh.
But over on the north side, Bear and Bottle has some really good. Have
They
you been
do.
there?
I have. Camping or hotels?
So I love camping, but when I go camping, I need to bring a real pillow and a real blanket. Sleeping bags just aren't for me.
Glamping?
Yeah, let's call it that.
Okay, one piece of advice to your younger self.
Believe in yourself.
Yeah.
I think there are so many voices out there, especially for women, for as you have talked about, LGBTQ folks that are inherently telling us that we can't or we shouldn't.
Right.
People need to believe in themselves.
Yeah.
We're pretty magical.
I like that.
Yeah.
We are pretty magical. Okay, a favorite place that makes you feel like home?
So it's actually a place in my car. So I grew up here in Dane County, and my parents were divorced. So I had lots of houses. I moved around a lot, and there were periods of time where I was housing insecure. But there is, as you're driving over John Nolan Drive, and you're coming into town, and you're driving between Monona, Lake Monona, and Monona Bay, and you're rounding that corner where they're talking about wanting to revitalize the lakeshore. You come around that corner and you see the Capitol. I know
That's
I'm
it.
home.
That's it. That's awesome. I love the diversity of answers to that question.
Yeah.
That's great. So Madison's home.
Madison's home.
Melissa Agard, thank you so much for being a part of this today. I appreciate you and all you're doing, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a great day to start.
Thank you.
Great way to start my day.
Yeah, this was good.